Hi, I'm licensed battlefield guide Tracy Baer, and today we're about 25 miles west of the battlefield of Gettysburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, where during the summer of 1859, a man who called himself Isaac Smith came to town. Now, Smith claimed to be in the mining business. He was prospecting for iron ore deposits, places to start new iron ore mines. He stayed here at the Mary Rittner boarding house. He wasn't here the entire summer. When he was here, he would be able to gaze out over the Cumberland Valley Railroad yards off to the north, to the rear of this building. He would see the trains coming and going, some of those trains bringing crates labeled mining equipment and mining tools that he would offload onto wagons and take them to nearby Oaks and Kaufman Warehouse on North Main Street. It wouldn't be until October of that year that the residents here in Chambersburg came to realize who this man really was. You see, Isaac Smith wasn't really Isaac Smith. Isaac Smith was, in fact, the radical abolitionist John Brown. The reason the people here didn't recognize him was that he had grown this billowy white beard as a disguise. You see, John Brown was a wanted man. After his orders to execute pro-slavery men in Kansas some years before, he needed a way to hide his true identity. What was John Brown doing here in Chambersburg? Well, he was using this house as a planning area for his intended raid on the United States Armory in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. In August, somewhere around the 19th, another famous individual would come to Chambersburg to meet with John Brown. This was another anti-slavery individual. In fact, it was a former slave by the name of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass came with another man named Sheets Green, and they would ask around of the African-American community and find out how they could get in touch with John Brown. They located Brown fishing along the Conacajig Creek on the southwestern skirt of town. The two men had known each other in the past, so they were familiar with one another. And as they approached, John Brown decided this was the appropriate time to lay out his plans for attacking the Federal Armory. He really wanted Frederick Douglass to join his small provisional army, never numbering more than a couple of dozen men. He outlined this plan and said to Douglass, when the slaves are freed, I'm going to need you. He termed it this way: when the bees swarm, I'm going to need you to hive them. And Douglass was confused. What are you talking about? Hive the bees? The slaves. When the slaves are freed, I'm going to need a man of your stature and your importance to help me control them. Douglass immediately replied with concern. He understood that the armory was a federal installation, and he told John Brown this. He said, by attacking the armory, you're attacking the federal government. And any attack on the federal government is nothing short of treason. Frederick Douglass declined to join John Brown, and he left him with a few prophetic words. He simply said, you're all going to die. Later that day, John Brown went about his business, and Frederick Douglass was walking the streets of Chambersburg, where he was recognized. This was a noticeable man, a recognizable, important man. And he had no real business here, and when the townsfolk approached him, he did not give up John Brown. In fact, he covered for him by saying, I'm here to give a speech on the sins of slavery and trying to make sure Chambersburg is aware of an abolitionist movement. So he spoke at the town hall that evening to a packed group of individuals. And then he would leave Chambersburg. John Brown would eventually start loading the crates that didn't contain mining equipment. In fact, they were iron pikes from New England and Sharp's carbines and Maynard revolvers from the Midwest that he intended to use to arm the freed slaves. He started loading them on wagons and transporting them to the Kennedy Farm in Maryland, just a few miles north of Harper's Ferry, Virginia. On the 16th of October of 1859, John Brown's very small army, somewhere numbering around 16 men, began to make their way to Harper's Ferry, where they began to raid the federal armory. When the local civilian population was alerted to what was going on, they took up arms and exchanged gunfire with John Brown's men. Finally, the U.S. government intervened, sending a small contingent of soldiers, commanded by Colonel Robert E. Lee, to Harper's Ferry to put down this small rebellion. When John Brown refused to surrender, he gave orders to one of his junior officers, a man by the name of James Ewell Brown Stewart, Jeb Stewart, to storm the engine house that John Brown and his men were barricaded inside. When the men stormed it, gunshots were exchanged. Several of John Brown's men were killed, including two of his own sons. John Brown himself was wounded. He was captured, taken prisoner, and carted off to nearby Charlestown, Virginia, the county seat, where he would stand trial for treason. And on December 2nd of 1859, those words of Frederick Douglass proved true. John Brown was hanged. In some of the later writings, the last writings that John Brown had, John Brown felt very strongly that his death as a martyr would be just as strong and powerful as his life as a soldier of abolition. In fact, John Brown's death and his raid on Harper's Ferry would turn out to be one of the incidents that would fan the flames that would eventually lead to the American Civil War less than a year and a half later. For 300 Seconds with a Licensed Battlefield Guide, I'm Tracy Baer.